Hytale's combat has a huge problem. One could call it a PV problem. Let me explain. Since Hytale was saved, we have seen a lot of combat, including PvE battles against NPCs in the Curse Breaker video and PvP battles in the recent PvP video. Individually, both systems look absolutely amazing, but crucially, they look different to each other. The key difference is that PvE has knockback and PvP did not, although we know that since has changed and knockback has been added to PvP, but there are other differences too. One is that Simon said that stuns and parries felt bad for PvP, but is considering adding them to PvE in the future, and another is that NPCs can use weapons like sickles and one-handed maces that we know are not usable by players yet. These differences are a huge problem for a game like Hytale. A common route for a new player to take in a game like this would be to play through the adventure mode, and once they finish adventure mode, take their newfound skills to online multiplayer. If in adventure mode you could stun mobs by blocking with a sword, and players try that in online duels and nothing happens, they will be very confused. If a player then uses a mace and tries to use the hilt bash attack to push back an opponent only for nothing to happen, the frustration and confusion caused by all their PvE experience not translating to PvP at all may cause players to give up on PvP forever. We know that knockback has been added to PvP now, but the willingness to add features to PvE before adding them to PvP, or without putting them in PvP at all, suggests there may be a gap in features between the two. This problem is compounded by the fact that Hypixel is going to focus on PvE initially, which will cause the inevitable PvP balancing mods that servers make for their PvP games to handle vastly differently to vanilla combat until Hypixel starts balancing PvP themselves, which again will discourage players from playing both PvP and PvE initially. Even once Hypixel starts balancing with both systems in mind for vanilla Hytale, they will still have problems, since the two systems are fundamentally very different. Let's say the developers want each weapon to be viable for PvE. Since weapons like maces can hit multiple enemies, it makes sense that they'll be stronger against large groups, so logically daggers should be stronger against solo enemies, balancing them to be relatively even overall, such that each has benefits over the other in PvE. Most PvP encounters are against one player, maybe up to 3, but rarely very many more than that. That means that if maces are balanced for their niche, fighting large groups, they will severely underperform in PvP situations. On the other hand, if maces are balanced to work well in one-on-one PvP, logically they would be absolutely broken when they're used to hit multiple enemies at once. At the end of the day, balancing the two systems together would be a huge headache for developers. The only way I can think of this would be to make damage multipliers for different weapons against each NPC type as well as players, so it is quite likely that PvE will always be prioritized since it's more central to the game, with PvP left to server hosts to balance themselves through mods. The problems here are obvious. Different servers will have completely differently balanced weapons, and a multiplayer adventure mode server would have to find a compromise between PvP and PvE balance if they wanted to allow for dungeon raids and duels at the same time. I have absolutely no idea how Hypixel intend to tackle this issue, and I'm not too sure that they do at this point either. My first suggestion would be unifying the systems so that knockback works the same in both, and not adding any features that aren't mob specific to PvE unless they will be mirrored to PvP. If it is a specific feature to a mob, like say there's some sort of thing where you can deflect his projectiles to hit it, like say a ghast, that would work, but otherwise generally you shouldn't just be able to like stun any mob if you can't stun players as well. Honestly, I'm surprised that PvE and PvP systems are so separate within the code that knockback can exist in one without existing in the other. It's kind of weird to me that that's the case, or maybe it isn't and we've just been misled by the videos, who knows, but unfortunately I think unified balancing might be impossible. My guess is we'll end up in a state where daggers are useless against any large clusters of mobs, especially compared to maces, and everything is about even against solo mobs and PvP. Maybe maces would need like a little bit of help from the terrain so that they can use their knockback to their advantage in one-on-ones, but generally pretty even. Maybe the higher attack rate of the daggers could be made to be useful against certain mobs or bosses, but generally speaking they'll probably be left alone outside of PvP. Another thing I've not really considered is the ability to switch between weapons during a fight, for nearly no punishment except emptying your signature gauge. I'm not sure how common it'll be to craft different weapons in adventure mode, but I figure people will carry at least a low level set of daggers for movement along with their main weapon. PvP servers will be able to limit players to certain weapons by controlling their inventory, or give them every weapon, depending on what the server wants. I don't really like the weapon switching system, but it will admittedly make balancing easier since players can switch to better weapons given the situation, rather than being stuck with a choice that becomes unideal for whatever reason. This probably also makes everything at least slightly useful, since a player could use daggers for movement, maces for knockback, a sword and shield for blocking, and the axe for damage, all in the same fight, only sacrificing their signature meter in the process. That probably isn't the most fun system, since most people like the idea of playing a main weapon. I know a lot of people want to main double daggers, and it also just adds a lot of extra stuff to keep track of in PvP, which Simon has basically said that he wants to avoid because he wants to keep the skill cap pretty low, but at least it would ensure every weapon sees a little bit of use, even if that use is only for one ability rather than the whole weapon. YouTube recently added Reddit-style reply trees to the comments, so I have 2 questions for you regarding combat to test it all out. 1. What are your thoughts on players being able to switch between weapons mid-fight? And 2. Do you think it's a problem that PvE and PvP may have separate features such as stuns? Head down there and tell me what you think. While you're down there, you may as well hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching the video. Stay hypey!